Life has a way of giving us dreams, only to test just how much we're willing to fight for them. Michael Carter thought he had it all. A steady job in construction, a fiancée he adored, plans for a wedding, and a lifetime together. But fate had other plans. One accident would change everything. One betrayal would shatter his trust. And one unexpected act of kindness would prove that sometimes love comes from the places we least expect. This is the story of a man who lost everything, yet found more than he ever thought possible. But as you listen, ask yourself this: if you lost it all, your health, your savings, the person you loved most, would you have the strength to start over? Or would you let life break you? Michael Carter was an ordinary man. At 32, he had worked his way up in a construction company, the kind of job that left his hands calloused and his body sore, but one that filled him with pride. He loved the smell of fresh timber, the clang of steel, and the camaraderie of men who built with their hands what others only dreamed of on paper. Every morning, he left his modest apartment with a thermos of coffee in one hand and determination in the other. He wasn't rich, not even close, but he believed in hard work. He believed that one day, it would all pay off. And perhaps most of all, he believed in her. Her name was Rachel, his fiancée, the woman he thought he would spend forever with. Rachel had a smile that could light up a room, and a way of making Michael believe he was more than just a construction worker. To him, she was everything. He worked long hours, saved every penny he could, and spent it not on himself, but on her. Vacations, gift, a wedding fund. He wanted to give Rachel a life better than anything he had ever known. Their evenings together were filled with laughter. They'd sit on the couch, planning their honeymoon, scrolling through pictures of beaches and cities they'd one day explore. Michael would always say, "Just a little longer, Rachel. One more job, one more paycheck, and then it'll all be ours." And Rachel would smile, kiss him softly, and whisper, "I know. I can't wait." Michael's world revolved around her, and he never once doubted that hers revolved around him. On weekends they traveled. Michael would book surprise getaways, even if it meant dipping into his savings. A cabin by the lake, a small seaside town, dinner at a restaurant with food they couldn't quite afford. Rachel loved the finer things, and Michael loved giving them to her. He often worked double shifts, climbing scaffolds long into the night, just so he could afford the sparkle in her eyes when she wore a new dress or held a glass of champagne. His co-workers teased him. "Carter," they'd laugh, "you're working yourself into an early grave just to keep that girl happy." Michael would grin, sweat dripping down his brow. She's worth it. And in his heart, he believed it. Their wedding date was circled on the calendar. Invitations had been drafted. Rachel had already tried on dresses, her excitement bubbling every time she returned from an appointment. Michael could see it. The aisle, the vows, the life they'd build together. Children, a house, a future carved out of love and hard work. He had no idea how quickly it could all be ripped away. No idea that a single moment on the job site would change everything. And no idea that the woman he trusted most would soon betray him in ways he could never have imagined. It was supposed to be an ordinary day. The sun had barely risen, painting the sky with soft streaks of pink and orange as Michael arrived at the construction site. He sipped his coffee, tightened his work gloves, and exchanged nods with the men he'd spent years working alongside. The building they were working on was massive, steel bones rising into the sky, soon to be a gleaming tower of glass and concrete. Michael loved seeing a project come alive piece by piece. It made all the sweat worth it. He checked the harness, inspected the scaffolding, and climbed up to where he'd spend the morning. The air was crisp, the city alive below him. Rachel had kissed him that morning, her perfume still lingering on his shirt. "Be safe," she'd said, her voice light but tinged with that familiar worry. And Michael, smiling, had reassured her as always. "I'll be fine. I always am." But that day, fate had other plans. Moments before, Michael worked with precision. He was steady, careful. He prided himself on never cutting corners, never risking safety. But accidents don't always come from mistakes. Sometimes they just come. The crane swung overhead, carrying a heavy load of steel beams. Workers shouted to each other. Signals passed back and forth. Michael adjusted his grip, leaning slightly as he secured a bolt. His harness tugged against him, tight but reliable. Then he heard it, a sound like a scream mixed with metal groaning under strain. He looked up. One of the chains holding the beam snapped. Time slowed. The massive weight swung violently, colliding with the scaffolding. The world erupted in chaos, steel clashing, men yelling, wood splintering. Michael tried to move, but the force was too sudden. The platform beneath him buckled. He fell, his body slamming hard against the metal structure before crashing onto the ground below. Pain exploded through him, sharp and unrelenting. The world went dark. When Michael opened his eyes, everything was white. The ceiling above him, the sheets tucked neatly around his body, the fluorescent lights that hummed overhead. At first, he thought he was dreaming, but then the pain returned, a deep, burning ache that spread through his legs. Rachel's face swam into view, her eyes red and puffy. "Michael," she whispered, grabbing his hand. "You're awake." His voice was hoarse, weak. What happened?" Her lips trembled. "There was an accident. The scaffolding collapsed. You fell." "Michael, your legs." She choked on the words, unable to finish. Michael felt his heart seize. He tried to move, but nothing happened. His legs, once strong and steady, lay still beneath the sheets. "No," he whispered, panic rising in his chest. "No, no, no." The machines beeped rapidly as his pulse spiked. Nurses rushed in, soothing him, telling him to breathe. But nothing they said could reach him. In that moment, Michael's world shattered. The truth sinks in. Days blurred into weeks. Surgeries, treatments, endless consultations. The verdict was always the same. The damage was severe. The nerves in his spine were crushed. He would never walk again. The words cut deeper than any wound. Michael stared at the ceiling for hours, numb. The man who had once scaled towers with ease couldn't even lift himself from a bed. Rachel was there in the beginning. She held his hand, brought flowers, kissed his forehead. But Michael noticed the change. Her visits grew shorter. Her smile faded faster. And sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, her eyes were distant, cold. He tried to ignore it, tried to cling to the love they built. But deep inside, a fear grew. Would she still want him? A man who couldn't stand at the altar, who couldn't dance at their wedding, who couldn't give her the life he'd promised. The company handled the situation swiftly. An investigation was launched, compensation discussed. Mr. Harding, his supervisor, visited him in the hospital. The man's usually gruff demeanor was softened with guilt. "Carter," he said quietly, "you've been one of our best men. This should never have happened." Michael swallowed hard, fighting the bitterness rising in his chest. "What happens now?" Harding sighed. "The doctors made it clear. You can't return to the field. We'll retire you on medical grounds. There'll be a settlement, enough to keep you comfortable." Michael wanted to scream, to fight, to argue that he wasn't done, that his story couldn't end like this. But the truth was undeniable. He was no longer the man who climbed steel beams and worked under the open sky. He was retired at 32, broken, dependent. When Harding left, Michael stared at the papers in his hands. The retirement documents, the settlement offer. A career built on sweat and strength ended with a signature. And when Rachel came that evening, She barely glanced at the papers before asking softly, "How much did they give you?" Her words pierced him deeper than the accident ever had. Back at his apartment, Michael's world felt smaller than ever. The walls closed in. The silence screamed louder than any construction site. Rachel still visited, but her warmth was gone. She spent more time on her phone than talking to him. She avoided his touch, her eyes restless. Michael tried to believe it was just stress, that she was hurting too. But every night, doubt clawed at him. He had built everything for her. And now, when he needed her most, she was slipping away. One evening, while Michael dozed in his wheelchair, he heard Rachel whispering on the phone. Her voice was low, urgent. He got the settlement. "Yes, I'll make sure you know when. Just be patient." Michael's heart pounded. Who was she talking to? What did she mean? When she noticed him awake, she smiled. Too quickly, too forced. "Just my mom," she said. But Michael knew. Deep inside, he knew. Something was wrong, and he had no idea that the woman he loved, the woman he had sacrificed everything for, was about to betray him in a way far worse than he could ever imagine. Michael Carter had always believed that the darkest nights eventually gave way to dawn. But in the weeks after his accident, the sun never seemed to rise. He woke each morning to the same grim reality. His legs motionless beneath the covers, his wheelchair waiting like a cage at the side of the bed, and the crushing silence of a home that no longer felt like his own. The papers confirming his retirement sat on the coffee table, taunting him. A career built from sweat, steel, and sacrifice had ended with a line of ink. A life he had once envisioned, full of purpose, pride, and building a future with Rachel, had crumbled overnight. But what he didn't yet know was that fate hadn't finished with him. His trials had only just begun. Rachel, once the center of his world, had become a stranger in his own home. In the hospital, she had cried and clung to him. But now, her affection had soured into impatience. She still came by, at least in the beginning. She made dinner some nights, scrolled through her phone as he tried to talk, and gave quick, distracted kisses before slipping out with excuses about errands, friends, or wedding plans that suddenly didn't involve him. Michael tried to ignore it, tried to convince himself that she was grieving too, that she was adjusting to their new reality. But the signs were too clear. Her phone never left her hand. She smiled at messages he never saw. And when she thought he was asleep, she slipped into the other room to take calls in hushed tones. He pretended not to notice, pretended not to hear, because the alternative, accepting the truth, would have destroyed him. The company wired the settlement money into his account 2 weeks after the papers were signed. It was more than Michael had ever seen in one place. A sum meant to secure his future, to ease the pain of a life cut short by accident. Rachel's eyes had lit up when he told her, too brightly. That's wonderful, Michael," she said, wrapping her arms around him. But the embrace was stiff, her eyes already calculating. Michael wanted to believe it was relief, that she was thinking about how it would help them rebuild. But deep inside, unease gnawed at him. Later that night, while he pretended to sleep, he heard her again on the phone. "Yes, he has it now. Don't worry, we'll do it soon." His chest tightened. Who was she talking to? And what did she mean by, "we'll do it soon"? Michael's instincts screamed that something was wrong. But he couldn't piece it together. His body betrayed him daily, and now it seemed his mind was doing the same. Whispering paranoia, feeding doubt. But the truth was worse than his imagination. Rachel had rekindled contact with her ex, a man Michael had only heard about in passing, dismissed as a figure from her past. What Michael didn't know was that this man, Derek, was no ordinary ex. He was dangerous, manipulative, and ran with men who thrived on crime. And together, Rachel and Derek had hatched a plan. The settlement money was the bait. Michael's vulnerability was the opportunity. The man who had once given Rachel everything would soon be left with nothing. It was late. Michael sat in the dim glow of the television, half watching a rerun he'd seen a dozen times, half lost in the quiet ache of his new reality. Rachel had stopped by earlier, but left in a rush, claiming she had to meet a friend. She hadn't kissed him goodbye. Around midnight, Michael wheeled himself toward the bedroom, exhaustion heavy in his bones. That's when he heard it, the faint creak of the back door. His heart skipped. He froze, listening. Then came the shuffle of footsteps. Heavy, more than one. "Hello?" Michael called, his voice trembling. "Rachel?" But it wasn't Rachel who answered. A figure stepped into the living room, face hidden behind a mask. Behind him, two more men followed, their presence filling the room with menace. Michael's blood ran cold. "What do you want?" he demanded, though his voice shook. The tallest one chuckled darkly. "You know what we want. Where's the money?" Michael's stomach dropped. The settlement. How did they know? He tried to wheel himself back, but one of the men shoved him roughly. The chair tipped, sending him crashing helplessly to the floor. Pain shot through his body, but he could do nothing. They tore through his home, overturning drawers, ripping cushions, searching with the precision of men who knew exactly what they were looking for. Michael crawled, dragging himself toward the phone, but a boot slammed down on his hand, crushing it into the floor. "Don't try anything, cripple," the man sneered. Minutes felt like hours, and then they found it. His bank cards, his documents, everything. Michael's life savings, his settlement, his last shred of security, gone in an instant. They left him on the floor, bruised, broken, and robbed not just of money, but of dignity. As the door slammed shut behind them, silence returned. But it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of devastation. The betrayal revealed. Hours passed before Rachel arrived. Michael was still on the floor, too weak to move. His body ached, his spirit shattered. When she walked in, she gasped dramatically. "Michael, what happened?" But her eyes betrayed her. No shock, no fear, just calculation. And in that moment, Michael knew. Her phone calls, her sudden distance, the robbers knowing exactly where to look. It was her. "You," he whispered, his voice hoarse with pain and rage. "You did this." Rachel froze, mask slipping for just a moment. Then she forced a sob. "Michael, how could you say that? I love you." But the lie hung heavy in the room, choking him. He turned his face away, tears burning his eyes. "Get out," he rasped. "Get out of my house." For a moment, she hesitated. Then, without a word, she left. And with her went every dream he had ever built. Left with nothing. The apartment was cold, the shadows long. Michael sat in his chair, staring at the empty space where his life had once been. His money gone, his fiancée gone, his future gone. He had nothing left. Night after night, he sat on the balcony, staring down at the city below. The thought crept in slowly, whispering at first, then screaming louder. End it. End the pain. End the humiliation. There's nothing left to live for. And one night, with tears streaming down his face, Michael wheeled himself to the edge. The night air was cold against Michael's skin. He sat at the very edge of the balcony, wheels of his chair touching the railing, heart pounding like a war drum. Below him, the city glowed with life. Cars passing, people laughing, lights flickering in apartment windows. But up here, on this ledge, Michael felt utterly alone. He leaned forward just slightly, his breath hitching. The thought of falling, of silence, of release, was almost comforting. "This isn't living," he whispered again, voice trembling with grief. This isn't life anymore." He tightened his grip on the railing. His body swayed. Just a little more, and the pain would be over. And then, a voice cut through the night. Don't do it. Michael froze. For a moment, he thought it was in his head, a hallucination born of despair. But then he turned, and there she was, the neighbor. A woman stood in the doorway of the balcony next to his. She leaned against the railing, her eyes wide but steady, her voice soft yet firm. Don't, she repeated, stepping closer. Please, whatever you're going through, this isn't the answer. Michael's throat tightened. His voice cracked when he spoke. You don't know me. You don't know what I've lost. The woman shook her head. Maybe not, but I know what giving up looks like. And I can't just stand here and watch it happen. Michael turned away, shame burning through him. Leave me alone. I don't need pity. But she didn't leave. She climbed over the divider between their balconies. A bold move that startled him. Suddenly, she was right there beside him, close enough to touch. Her presence was grounding, her gaze unwavering. My name's Sarah, she said quietly. I live next door, and I'm not leaving you like this. Michael's chest heaved, tears streaming down his face. I've lost everything, he whispered. My job, my legs, the woman I was supposed to marry, even the money I had to survive, gone. They took everything. And she, his voice broke. She was the one who gave me to them. Sarah's eyes softened with sorrow, but there was no judgment in her face. Only compassion. Then they don't deserve you, she said firmly. None of them. You still have breath in your lungs, a heart that beats. That means you still have something left to give this world. Michael shook his head violently. You don't understand. I'm broken. Useless. No, Sarah said, her voice steady as stone. You're hurt, but you're not useless. You're not done. And if you step over that edge tonight, you'll never know what you could have been tomorrow. Her words pierced through the fog of despair. For the first time in weeks, something shifted inside him. A faint flicker of doubt against the certainty of ending it all. Michael's grip on the railing loosened just slightly. His arms trembled with exhaustion. Sarah moved closer, lowering herself to his level so their eyes met. Take my hand, she whispered. Please. He looked at her hand, steady, outstretched, waiting. His breath hitched. Part of him still wanted to let go, to fall, to end it all. But another part, small, fragile, desperate, reached forward. His fingers brushed hers. She clasped them tightly, pulling him back from the edge with surprising strength. Michael collapsed against her, sobbing uncontrollably. Sarah wrapped her arms around him, holding him as though she had known him all her life. You're not alone, she murmured. Not anymore. Michael expected her to vanish after that night, like an angel who appeared only to stop him. But the next morning, there was a knock at his door. When he opened it, Sarah stood there holding a plate of breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and a cup of coffee. I didn't know how you take it, she said softly, so I made it the way I like it. Michael blinked at her, stunned. No one, not even Rachel, in those last cold weeks, had shown him this kind of simple, human kindness. Why are you doing this? He asked, voice thick with emotion. Sarah smiled gently. Because I know what it's like to feel like life isn't worth living. Someone once pulled me back from that edge. Now it's my turn to do the same. Michael's throat tightened. He nodded slowly, wheeling back to let her in. They ate in silence at first, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Sarah talked about small things, her job at a local library, her love of painting in her free time, her garden that always seemed to need more attention than she could give. Michael listened quietly, surprised at how natural it felt to hear another voice in his home. When she left later that day, she smiled warmly. I'll be back tomorrow, if that's okay. For the first time in months, Michael felt something stir inside him, a tiny ember of hope, fragile but real. And as the door closed behind her, he realized he wanted her to come back. The days that followed, Sarah kept her promise. Every day, she visited. Sometimes with food, sometimes with books, sometimes just with her presence. She never pushed, never pried, but slowly, piece by piece, Michael began to open up. He told her about his accident, about Rachel, about the robbery that had left him penniless. Sarah listened without judgment, her eyes full of quiet empathy. And when he finally whispered, "I thought I had nothing left to live for," she reached across the table, squeezed his hand, and said, "Then let's find something worth living for." Together, one night, after she left, Michael wheeled himself back to the balcony. He looked at the city lights again, the same view that had tempted him toward death. But this time, his heart felt different. This time, he thought not of falling, but of climbing back, of rising, step by step, with Sarah's voice echoing in his heart. "You're not done." The words stayed with him. And for the first time since the accident, Michael whispered back into the night, maybe I'm not." The days that followed blurred into a rhythm Michael hadn't known he needed. Sarah kept her word. She showed up every morning, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with a bag of groceries, sometimes with nothing but her presence. And each time, she carried with her a warmth that slowly thawed the ice around Michael's heart. Learning to trust again. At first, Michael remained guarded. He had trusted once before, trusted Rachel with his love, his future, his dreams, only to have her betray him in the cruelest way. The wound was still raw, and the thought of opening up to anyone again felt dangerous. But Sarah didn't demand trust. She earned it, piece by piece. One morning, she found him staring at a framed picture on the wall. An old photograph of him and Rachel at the beach, their arms wrapped around each other, smiles wide and genuine. "You don't have to hide that," Sarah said softly when she noticed him hastily turning the frame face down. Michael's jaw tightened. "It's nothing, just old memories." Sarah tilted her head, her voice gentle. "Memories are part of who we are. The good, the bad, even the painful ones. But they don't define who we can become." Michael looked at her then, really looked. For the first time, he felt like someone saw past his bitterness, straight into the raw wound of his soul. He didn't reply, but that night, he left the picture face up. The first step toward healing. It was Sarah who suggested therapy. One morning, as she set a steaming mug of coffee on the table, she said casually, "You ever think about seeing someone? A therapist, I mean." Michael scoffed. "What good would that do? Talking won't give me back my legs, won't bring back the money I lost, won't erase what she did to me." Sarah didn't flinch. "No, but it might help you carry the weight of it." Michael shook his head, bitterness rising. "You don't understand." "I don't," she admitted. "But I know what it's like to drown in silence, to choke on pain you never let out. And I also know that it's possible to breathe again." Her words lingered long after she left. That night, as Michael lay awake staring at the ceiling, he thought of her quiet strength, her unwavering presence. Maybe, just maybe, she was right. A week later, he asked her for the number of the therapist she had mentioned. Therapy was harder than Michael expected. The first session left him shaken. He had to talk about the accident, about the moment the scaffolding gave way, about the pain that consumed his body and the sound of his co-workers screaming his name. He had to relive the betrayal. Rachel's cold eyes as she stood in court beside her new man, pretending she hadn't planned the robbery that destroyed him. But the hardest part wasn't the memories. It was admitting how close he had come to ending it all. His voice broke when he said it out loud. I almost jumped." The therapist didn't recoil. She nodded calmly, compassion in her eyes. "And yet you didn't, which means something inside you still wanted to live. That matters, Michael. That matters more than you realize." Michael left the session exhausted, hollowed out. But when Sarah came by that evening, he found himself telling her about it. Not everything, but enough. And when he admitted, "It was harder than I thought," Sarah smiled softly and said, "The hardest steps are usually the ones worth taking. The more time they spent together, the closer they became." Sarah had a way of making Michael laugh. A quiet, rusty sound that surprised him when it escaped his lips. One afternoon, she tried to teach him how to cook her favorite pasta recipe. The kitchen became a mess of spilled sauce and overcooked noodles, and Michael found himself laughing until tears rolled down his cheeks. For a moment, he forgot the chair beneath him. He forgot the pain. He forgot Rachel. All he saw was Sarah, her bright smile, her gentle eyes, the way her presence filled the empty spaces of his home and heart. And something inside him shifted. One evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the city lights, Michael spoke without thinking. "You saved my life," he said quietly. Sarah turned to him, her expression soft. "No, you saved your own life. I was just there to remind you it was worth saving." Michael swallowed hard, his throat tight. "No, it was more than that. If you hadn't come that night, if you hadn't reached for me," he shook his head, "I wouldn't be here." Sarah's hand brushed against his on the armrest. "Then maybe we both needed to be there. Maybe saving each other is part of the deal." For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy, charged, unspoken. Michael felt his heart pound in his chest, but he said nothing more. Not yet. Recovery wasn't a straight line. Some days, Michael woke with determination. He pushed through therapy exercises, gritted his teeth against the pain, and told himself he was making progress. Other days, he collapsed into despair. The smallest reminder of Rachel, a song, a smell, even a memory, sent him spiraling. One night, after a particularly grueling therapy session, he snapped at Sarah. "Why are you even doing this? What do you want from me? Pity? Gratitude? Because I can't keep giving you nothing in return." Sarah didn't get angry. She didn't leave. She simply looked at him with calm, steady eyes. "I'm here because I care," she said softly. "Not because I expect anything back. But if you can't see that yet, then I'll just keep showing you until you do." Her patience broke something inside him, not in a painful way, but in a way that allowed the walls to finally crack. That night, he whispered into the dark, "I don't deserve her." But a small, stubborn voice inside him whispered back, "Maybe you do." As weeks turned into months, Michael began to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not just for his recovery, but for his heart. For a future that didn't look like the one he had lost, but one that could still be beautiful. He noticed the way Sarah laughed, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her favorite books, the way she never made him feel less for the chair beneath him. And slowly, carefully, he let himself imagine what it would mean if she were more than just his neighbor. It happened on a rainy evening. They sat in the living room, listening to the storm beat against the windows. Sarah curled up on the couch with a blanket, her hair loose around her shoulders, her presence as natural as the sound of the rain. Michael's chest tightened with unspoken words. "I'm scared," he admitted finally. Sarah looked up. Of what? Of this. Of feeling something again. Of letting someone close, only to be broken again. Sarah's expression softened. She set her mug down and moved closer, her voice quiet but steady. "I'm not her, Michael. I'm not here to take. I'm here to stay, if you'll let me." His heart pounded. His throat ached with emotion. And for the first time, he allowed himself to believe her. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was full of trust, of possibility, of something tender and new. Michael didn't confess the words out loud yet, but deep inside, he knew the truth. He was falling in love with Sarah. Recovery was never meant to be easy. Michael learned that the hard way. Every morning, he dragged himself to the edge of his bed, strapped on his braces, and wheeled himself to the corner where a set of parallel bars stood. The therapist had recommended them, and Sarah had helped install them right there in his apartment. The first time he tried to stand, his legs trembled like fragile branches in the wind. His arms bore most of the weight, sweat dripping down his temples, his jaw clenched in agony. "Come on, Michael," Sarah urged softly from behind him, her hands hovering near his waist. "One step, just one." His body screamed in protest, but his heart pushed forward. Slowly, painstakingly, he dragged 1 foot an inch forward, then the other. By the time he collapsed back into his chair, he was gasping for air, drenched in sweat. But Sarah was smiling through her tears. "You did it!" Michael shook his head, frustration burning. "That was nothing. I look pathetic." Sarah crouched in front of him, meeting his eyes. "That was everything. Don't you dare diminish it. You fought. You stood. You moved. That's hope, Michael. That's progress." For the first time, he let himself believe her. As weeks passed, the steps grew longer. The bars became less terrifying. Each time Michael stood, he found himself remembering Sarah's words. That's hope. That's progress. One evening, after a grueling session, he sat slumped in his chair, muscles aching, body trembling. Sarah handed him a towel, her smile gentle but proud. "You're stronger than you realize." Michael looked at her, his heart swelling. "I only got this far because of you." Sarah shook her head. "No, you got this far because you refused to give up." But Michael knew the truth. Without Sarah, he would have given up long ago. Moments of light. It wasn't all therapy and struggle. Sarah had a gift for filling Michael's world with light in small, unexpected ways. She brought books and read aloud to him when his mind grew restless. She painted in the corner of his living room, her brushstrokes soft and rhythmic, filling the silence with color. One Saturday afternoon, she wheeled him to a nearby park. The air smelled of fresh grass, children's laughter echoed in the distance, and Michael felt something he hadn't felt in months, normal. As they watched a group of kids fly kites, Sarah leaned closer. "See, the world is still out there, waiting for you." Michael smiled faintly. "And here I thought it had forgotten me." Sarah's hand brushed against his. "Never." The touch lingered longer than either of them acknowledged. It happened on a quiet Tuesday morning. Michael had been practicing with the bars, sweat dripping down his face, when something shifted. His legs trembled, but they held. He pushed forward. One step, then another, without collapsing. For a moment, he was standing taller than he had since the accident. He looked at Sarah, who stood frozen in awe, her hands covering her mouth. "Michael," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "You're walking." It wasn't perfect. It wasn't graceful. But it was real. Michael's chest heaved with emotion, his heart pounding like a drum. He wanted to laugh, to cry, to scream all at once. Instead, he whispered, "We did it." Sarah threw her arms around him, holding him tightly as he clung to her. "No," she said against his shoulder. "You did it." That evening, Sarah surprised him. She pulled out an old record player she had mentioned owning but never used, set a vinyl on the turntable, and let soft jazz fill the room. Michael sat in his chair, watching her sway to the music. Her hair caught the light, her movements graceful and effortless. "Dance with me," she said suddenly, her eyes locking on his. Michael blinked. "Sarah, not with your legs," she interrupted gently. "With your heart." She stepped closer, took his hands, and began to sway with him. At first, Michael felt awkward, self-conscious. But as the music washed over him and Sarah's warmth surrounded him, he let go. They moved together, his chair spinning gently as she guided him. And for the first time in a long, long time, Michael felt whole. After the song ended, silence lingered. Sarah's hands were still on his, her breath soft against his face. Michael's heart raced. He knew he couldn't hold it back any longer. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice trembling. I think I'm falling in love with you." Her eyes widened, shimmering with emotion. For a heartbeat, fear flickered in his chest. Fear that he had ruined everything. But then Sarah smiled, her voice soft but sure. "I've been falling too." Michael's chest ached with a rush of joy and relief. He let out a shaky laugh, tears welling in his eyes. "After everything, after how broken I've been, you still—" Sarah silenced him with a gentle touch to his cheek. "You're not broken, Michael. You're becoming." And then, for the first time, they kissed. It wasn't desperate or rushed. It was slow, tender, and filled with all the unspoken promises of two hearts finding each other in the wreckage of pain. From that night on, something shifted between them. Their days were still filled with therapy, with struggle, with slow progress. But now, there was also laughter, warmth, and love. Michael pushed himself harder than ever before, not just for himself, but for Sarah, for the future he wanted to build with her. And each time he faltered, Sarah was there, steady as the ground beneath him. Together, they were unstoppable. For months, Michael had worked to rebuild his life with Sarah by his side. Each day brought progress, however small. And with every step, the wounds of betrayal healed just a little more. But the past has a way of clawing back when least expected. One morning, as he sat with Sarah in the living room, sipping coffee and planning their weekend, the news came on. A headline flashed across the screen. "Local crime syndicate busted in police sting. Key members arrested." The camera showed a lineup of handcuffed men being dragged into police vans. And among them, Michael froze at a familiar face. Rachel's ex, the man she had chosen over him. The one who had led the robbery that stripped him of everything. Michael's chest tightened, his hand trembling around the mug. Sarah noticed immediately. "Michael?" she asked softly. He pointed at the screen, his voice low, ragged. "That's him. That's the man who ruined me." As the story unfolded, Michael learned the truth. The gang had been under investigation for months. The police had gathered enough evidence to bring them down on charges of robbery, fraud, and assault. And Rachel, his Rachel, had been arrested too. Not just as a bystander, but as an active conspirator. She had been caught laundering money stolen from victims, Michael among them. The camera briefly showed her being escorted from a courthouse, her once proud face now pale and defiant, eyes darting like a cornered animal. Michael's stomach twisted. He had imagined this moment countless times, seeing her pay for what she had done. He thought he would feel triumph, satisfaction, but instead, he felt something else, relief. Weeks later, Michael was called to testify. He wheeled himself into the courtroom, Sarah walking firmly beside him, her presence giving him strength. The room fell silent as he entered, whispers rippling through the crowd. Rachel sat across from him at the defense table. When her eyes met his, a flicker of something passed between them. Regret, perhaps, or maybe just the realization that the man she had discarded was no longer broken. Michael's voice trembled at first as he recounted his story. The accident, the settlement, the robbery that left him penniless. But as he spoke, his voice grew steadier, stronger. "She didn't just betray me," he said firmly, pointing toward Rachel. "She betrayed the love I gave her. She betrayed the future we planned. And she betrayed the trust of someone who would have given her everything." The judge nodded gravely. The prosecutor built on Michael's testimony, painting a clear picture of Rachel's role in the scheme. When the verdict came, guilty on multiple counts, Rachel's face crumbled. Michael didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply closed his eyes and let out a long, shaky breath. Justice had been served. After the trial, Rachel was escorted past him on her way to the holding cells. For a brief moment, Their eyes met again. Her voice was a whisper, desperate. "Michael, I'm sorry." Michael studied her face, the face he had once loved so deeply. But now, all he felt was distance, as though she were a stranger wearing the mask of someone he used to know. "Sorry doesn't undo what you did," he said quietly. "And it doesn't give me back what you stole. But I hope, for your sake, you learn what real love means before it's too late." Rachel's eyes brimmed with tears as she was led away. Sarah slipped her hand into Michael's. He squeezed it, steady and strong. The story of the trial spread quickly. Michael's courage in testifying became a point of admiration in his community. Neighbors who had once looked at him with pity now looked at him with respect. The construction company that had once retired him reached out. They had seen his progress, heard of his determination, and wanted to offer him something he thought he had lost forever: reinstatement. When the call came, Michael was stunned. "Are you serious?" The voice on the other end chuckled warmly. "We'd be lucky to have you back, Carter. You've shown more grit and strength than most men ever will." Michael's eyes burned with tears as he glanced at Sarah. She was smiling, her eyes shining with pride. Justice served, dignity restored. That night, as they sat together on the balcony where his darkest moment had nearly claimed him, Michael whispered, "It feels like life finally gave me back my dignity." Sarah leaned against him, her voice soft but firm. "No, you took it back, piece by piece, step by step. Justice didn't just happen in court. It happened the moment you chose to keep living." Michael wrapped an arm around her, his heart full. The past was finally behind him. Karma had played its part. Justice had been served. And ahead of him, for the first time in a long time, was a future filled with promise. The morning sun poured through the blinds, golden light spilling across the apartment that had once been filled with despair. Now, it hummed with life. Michael sat at the table, reviewing the official letter from the construction company. His reinstatement wasn't just symbolic. It came with a position tailored to his strengths, ensuring he could contribute without endangering his recovery. For the first time in years, he had purpose again. Sarah came up behind him, resting her hands on his shoulders. "So, how does it feel? Back to work?" Michael smiled, a warmth spreading through his chest. "Feels like a second chance, like I've been handed the pen to write the rest of my story." She leaned down, kissed the top of his head. "You earned it, every bit of it." Their love had grown quietly but unshakably. So when Michael finally knelt, shaky legs and all, to propose, Sarah's tears flowed freely. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. 1,000 times yes. The wedding was small but perfect. Friends, neighbors, and even some of Michael's old co-workers gathered to witness the moment. The same man who had once sat at the edge of his balcony ready to give up now stood, with braces hidden beneath his suit, tall enough to look into Sarah's eyes as they exchanged vows. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, Michael's heart swelled with gratitude. For Sarah, for survival, for redemption. And as he kissed his bride, the applause around them felt like the universe itself applauding the miracle of his journey. Walking back into the construction company stirred emotions Michael hadn't expected. His co-workers greeted him with claps on the back and words of admiration. The man they had once seen broken had returned, not just standing, but stronger than ever. The foreman shook his hand firmly. "We thought we'd lost you for good, but look at you now." Michael smiled, steady and confident. "I guess you can't keep a good man down forever." The room erupted in laughter, but beneath it was something deeper: respect. One evening, Michael and Sarah sat once more on the balcony that had once been his place of despair. The city lights glittered below, just as they had that terrible night. But everything had changed. Michael held Sarah's hand, his voice steady. "This view used to remind me of how far I could fall. Now, It reminds me of how far I've climbed. Sarah rested her head on his shoulder. And how much further we'll go. Together. Michael kissed her hair, his heart swelling with love. The scars of his past would never fully fade. The accident, the betrayal, the nights of darkness. But they no longer defined him. What defined him now was resilience, love, and the woman who had pulled him back from the edge. As they sat in the quiet night, Michael whispered, "Funny how life works. I thought my story was over. Turns out, it was just beginning." Sarah smiled softly. Maybe that's the lesson, that we're never really finished, unless we give up. Michael squeezed her hand, gazing out at the city that once nearly claimed his life. And then, he asked a question not just to her, but to the universe, and in your channel's narration, to the viewers themselves. What do you think? Was it fate that brought Sarah to my balcony that night? Or just a chance that changed everything